Since Lent is just around the corner, as we heard earlier from Vicki, I'd like to begin my sermon today with a couple of juicy confessions. Confession number 1. I am thoroughly and without shame addicted to Downton Abbey. I am so addicted to Downton Abbey that if after church and after church meeting goes on for too long, I will try to bring it to a close by citing a very important appointment I have to get to. I love Downton Abbey for all sorts of reasons, not the least of which is that glorious Maggie Smith as the Dowager Countess. What a role. But my real attraction to this series is that it provides a bird's eye view into a world that is all but forgotten. A world of elegance and charm, manners and form. Of course, in my imagination, I always live in the Abbey. I don't work at it. But part of the dramatic tension in the series is the fact that all of these things, all of this charm and elegance and form, are passing away. The whole world is changing. Downton Abbey is about fading glory. Confession number 2. I live in fear of my own fading glory. Depending on the light and how much I have slept, I either look vaguely like I did about 10 years ago, or I look exactly like my father. A few weeks ago, I attended a retirement seminar hosted by the pension boards of the United Church of Christ, and when I arrived at 475 Riverside Drive, I took great comfort in being one of the youngest people there, until I remembered that it was a retirement seminar. Not long ago, I was speaking to my sister, who is 8.5 years younger than I am, and I was bemoaning my fading glory when she said, in an attempt to try to bolster my spirits, "Well, Jimmy, you peaked late." Peaked, I said. As in the past tense. She is not in the will anymore. Today's gospel lesson is all about glory, or so we think. One day, Jesus took Peter, James, and John and led them up a high mountain, and once they reached the summit, Jesus was transfigured before their eyes. His clothing became dazzling white. In some of the other gospels, it's also his skin and his hair that become dazzling white. In all of the gospel stories, Moses and Elijah appear on the mountaintop. Moses, the giver of the law, Elijah, the prophet. And they have this conversation with Jesus, to which we are not privy. This celestial fireworks display apparently scared the daylights out of the disciples, and Peter sort of babbled on and on. "It's good for us to be here, Lord. Let us build 3 memorials, one for you, one for Elijah, one for Moses." And Mark adds the side commentary that Peter babbled on and on like that because he just didn't know what else to say. And then a cloud overshadowed them, and out of this cloud a voice spoke. And the voice said, "This is my Son, the beloved. Listen to him." And then suddenly it was all over. It was as if they had awakened from some strange dream. They looked around them, and they didn't see anybody anymore, except for Jesus. Just Jesus. Now, maybe you cannot identify with the story of being transfigured on a mountaintop. I can't. But all of us in this room, everybody in this world, at least we hope, all of us have known some moments of transcendent, transfiguring glory, supernovas of good news, and fresh starts, and beginnings, and hope, and love. We tend to mark our lives by these glory days. We even call them that, our glory days. And for me, I can never come to this day in the liturgical calendar without remembering the glory of Transfiguration 2006. I say it every year. I'll say it for however many years I continue to be here. On Transfiguration 2006, you all called me to be your pastor. Recently, Marcos pulled out the video of that event, and I watched it from start to finish. The nervous sort of sermon that I gave, the patient looks on all of your faces, the being called back into the basement where you all greeted me with a standing ovation. It really was this luminous moment for me. Transfiguration 6 years before that, Transfiguration 2000, this congregation marched down Broadway from 99th Street, from St. Michael's Church, where you had lived for 15 years, to this church, your new home. The people of Advent Lutheran stood on those steps right out there and sang their welcome to us. They sang. After years and years of wandering, this congregation had a home again. And I know from talking to some of you who were around back then that this was a luminous moment in the life of the community. It was full of light and promise and glory. In your own lives, you have climbed mountains. You have basked in the glory of a newborn baby, or the job of your dreams, or meeting Mr. or Ms. Right. Moments like these can be so charged with the light of God that sometimes they stop us dead in our tracks. Sometimes they're so bright, so luminous, so sort of otherworldly that all we can do is just sort of babble on and on and on about the goodness that has happened to us. But I know, and you know, that these moments do not last. Sometimes and far too soon, these moments vanish like that cloud on top of the Mount of Transfiguration. I still love my job 6 years later, but the honeymoon has been over for a long time now. We still love this building, but it is hard work to live with another family. Children grow up and sometimes break our hearts, and even if they don't, they all leave. Dream jobs can become boring. Lovers become strangers. The supernova of our glory burns out, and all we are left with is darkness. Or so we think. In what could be seen as a throwaway line, Mark concludes this story by saying, suddenly, when they looked around, they saw no one anymore but only Jesus. Just Jesus. Not a glowing, transfigured Jesus, just Jesus. Not Moses or Elijah or a talking cloud, just Jesus. And this Jesus walked with them, led them back down into the valley of their everyday lives. Jesus led them down the mountain back into a world ruled by Rome and a road that was going to lead to a cross. Suddenly, when they looked around, they saw no one with them anymore, but only Jesus. A few years ago, I read this fascinating article about elderly patients with advanced dementia. Some of these folks can no longer recognize their family members. Some of them didn't even know their own names, the article said. But the author pointed out that when these patients went to chapel services, sometimes something deep inside of them seemed to wake up. They would be mute throughout most of the liturgy, but when they came to something very familiar, deeply ingrained, like the Lord's Prayer or the 23rd Psalm, they would begin to speak. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. They would find the words to sing very well-known hymns. The glory of their lives was long since past. Their careers and achievements and loves were not even their memories anymore. But something essential remained with them. Suddenly, when they looked around, they saw no one with them anymore, but only Jesus. So this story of the Transfiguration is a story of glory. But maybe the good news of the gospel in the Transfiguration story isn't about the glory. Maybe it's about the fading glory. You see, none of us live on mountaintops. We visit sometimes, we hope to visit a lot, but we live in the valley. In the everydayness of our routines, day in and day out. And in this valley, we can see our glory fading sometimes. Sometimes we are afraid. Sometimes I am afraid. Except we think we're alone, but we're not. Suddenly, when they looked around, when I looked around, I saw no one with me anymore, except for Jesus. The late Dr. Carl Jung borrowed a phrase from the medieval scholar Erasmus, who once famously said, "Bidden or unbidden, God is present." Dr. Jung was so convinced of this truth that he put it on a sign over the doorway to his office where he saw people. He liked it so much that his family had it inscribed upon his tombstone, "Bidden or unbidden, God is present." St. Mark said the same thing like this. Suddenly, when they looked around, they saw no one anymore, but only Jesus. The night before he was killed, Martin Luther King gave a speech in which he said, "We've got some difficult days ahead, but it doesn't matter with me now. Because I've been to the mountaintop and I've looked over and I have seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. For mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord." It is the nature of glory to fade. The glory of our careers, the glory of our youth, the glory of our minds. But it is also the essential nature of Christ to remain. On the highest mountains of our joy, or in the deepest valleys of our grief, and in all those days in between, Jesus Christ remains ever present with us. He promised to never leave us, to never forsake us. Whether we're in a glory cloud or down in a valley, you can count on it. I count on it. Suddenly, when they looked around, they saw no one with them anymore, but only Jesus. Thanks be to God. Amen.